My name's Jenna Morris and I love cooking because it provides freedom.
Whilst all modes of documentary making are important in understanding and examining them, we found the poetic and expository modes were significant in our short film. During the editing process and seeing the film come together, we noticed that these two documentary modes coincide to produce a certain quality. So the poetic mode, which is modernist and avant-garde, relates to our stylistic approach, including shot choices, the order of continuity, and how it aims to capture a particular tonal mood. The expository mode uses the images and subjectivity as evidence, and it relies heavily on informing logic by dialogue. In this instance, Jenna shows enthusiasm whilst explaining her passion for cooking.
My love for cooking has definitely changed since being at uni. It's definitely grown a lot. I feel like I've had to become a lot more budget friendly and experiment more with different ingredients I wouldn't necessarily reach for.
Where it originated.
My dad used to make this creamy cheese pasta and it's been my favourite meal even now.
And why she experiments with a lot of recipes.
Vegetarian, I definitely think a lot of things have changed for me. I found myself reaching for different kinds of ingredients like chickpeas and making like a chickpea salad, for example.
In Introduction to Documentary, Bill Nichols writes that one of the 4 key elements that form the basis of documentary film is indexical documentation, so shared with scientific images and the cinema of attractions. Linking to poetic documentary mode, this creates a sense of realism, specifically in terms of time and space. This way is essential for narrative storytelling, and in the context of our documentary, relating image to spoken word creates a sense of order. So, for example, as she says that boiling vegetables is her least favourite part, there is a close-up shot of the vegetables actually boiling.
As for my least favourite part of it, probably just boiling the vegetables. It's just quite boring, to be honest.
Similarly, as she explains that her favourite part is seasoning the chickpeas, there is an overhead shot of her doing so.
I think my favourite part of making the chickpea salad is seasoning the chickpeas. I know there's not too much seasoning going on there, but I'm such a sucker for putting a bit of honey with a bit of chili powder. It's just amazing.
During the post-production of the documentary, one of the primary elements I wanted to focus on was creating a cohesive narrative throughout the edit, and how we could use different tools to optimize the refined final version of the documentary. The primary issue we faced during the post-production was that one of the cameras had a slight orange tint to it that we couldn't fix on location. To rectify this issue, we ended up using the color correction tool within Avid so that we could create a better foundation for the rest of the clips that were affected, so it could better match the primary camera that we were using. This also allowed us to adjust specific elements of the color correction to better match the cohesive cinematography of the documentary. When we were editing, we found that we would be sitting down together to view the progress and draft any ideas we may have had so that we could experiment around and find a better version of the rough cut for the documentary. Now applying the research I have gathered for this reflection, one of the insights I made note of was regarding the creative process and how it portrays the ideology of having a role allocation within the post-production period. Bernard makes reference to how editors will usually take on the workload themselves so that they can have the sort of final say on the creative process. Expanding on this idea further, our experience was that this created a more collaborative experience with the filmmaking and the post-production period of the documentary. Harkening back to Bernard's example, in this scenario, a producer would have an overseeing role advising the editor on what changes to make during the 3 stages of editing. Looking back at our project, the reason why we worked together on the edit was for both workflow, organization, and, like I mentioned earlier, being able to exchange ideas with one another. One of the elements we focused on for the documentary was how the narrative would cohesively flow and be understandable to the audience. In my research, Bernard again references how editors will use an adapted script to adhere to the visual flow of the narrative. To expand on this further, we as a group create a rough outline of the beginning, middle, and end of the narrative so that we could tell the story with Jenna's meal being the flowing focus throughout the documentary. This meant that we would start off with Jenna prepping the ingredients for her meal, and then finally sitting down to eat the meal while referencing all of the memories that she has growing up, the reasons why she's vegetarian, and other elements of storytelling.
So a couple of our initial ideas on what the subject of the documentary could be were the Unio coffee shop on campus and one of the university's own sports clubs. Badminton, for example, came up a few times in the discussion. As you can see in the final product, though, the subject of the documentary ended up being Jenna and her cooking. This was a good choice, as focusing the documentary on one person rather than a whole shop or a club made the documentary feel more personal and relatable to the viewer. Speaking of this subject, Jenna proved to be very easy to work with. She was very patient with the crew when we needed another take or when we were having technical difficulties. She was also very communicative about the step-by-step process of the recipe. If she forgot something about the recipe and we needed to go back and film that part, she was very honest and open with us about that. There is a book called the Shut Up and Shoot Documentary Guide, and there is a quote from that book that goes, "You want to impress upon your subjects that the interview process is just a conversation between you and them. Looking directly into the camera or stealing glances is disturbing to the audience."
My name's Jenna Morris, and I love cooking because it provides freedom.
We got around this by having Jenna speak exclusively in narration. We filmed a video of her speaking to the camera, but only used the audio from that part. And any part of that recording where we would ask her the question, we cut out and had her answer in full sentences so that we could still understand what she was talking about.
We reviewed food-based programs to understand the different approaches that are taken to filming food. The aim of our chosen cinematography style was to highlight the process of how the meal was made and the food itself. In addition to this, we wanted to show Jenna cooking so the audience could be introduced to her visually as well as through her voiceover. The emphasis on the close-ups was an aspect we were all dedicated to on the filming days because it's a clear visual way to show the audience what Jenna was talking about. We discussed using a track for our shots, but once we had decided on a subject matter and space, we realised that this was no longer possible due to the space limitations.
In conclusion, the efforts we made within the documentary were inspired from previous cooking documentaries that we had viewed beforehand, and as well as making use of the academic resources we had researched beforehand as well. As you can see from this example, this adds to Izzy's point of argument about how when we were viewing these documentaries, we understood what technical elements they used, and we applied those elements to our own documentary so that we could create our own design. The primary difference between our own documentary and the documentaries that we had viewed beforehand is that they made use of the talking head mechanic. For our documentary, we decided not to make use of this mechanic, as we believed that it would not propel the storytelling and not make it engaging. We decided to match the movements of what was going on during the shoot day and match that with the narration of Jenna.